The officer's hand was already on the door handle before the car had even come to a full stop. That's how fast it happened. That's how little it took. Sergeant First Class Odessa Pruitt Wainwright had driven this same stretch of Highway 41 outside of Clarksville, Tennessee, more times than she could count. She knew every exit, every overpass, every mile marker. She'd driven it coming home from Fort Campbell after long deployment. She'd driven it to her mother's funeral 3 years ago. She'd driven it in the dark, in the rain, in the kind of exhaustion that makes your eyes heavy and your hands automatic on the wheel. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving. She had both hands exactly where they were supposed to be. But the car was a 2023 Mercedes-Benz GLS, black on black, with chrome trim that caught the afternoon sun like a mirror. And Odessa Pruitt Wainwright was a black woman driving it alone on a Tuesday afternoon in Montgomery County. That, apparently, was enough. The cruiser had been sitting in the median. She'd noticed it the way any careful driver notices a parked patrol car, briefly, without alarm, foot easing off the accelerator out of habit, even though she was already doing 61 in a 65. She watched it in her rear view as she passed, watched the lights come on, watched it pull out. She thought maybe he was heading somewhere. Maybe a call had come in. She moved to the right lane to give him room. He pulled in behind her. She signaled. She pulled over cleanly onto the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath the tires. She put the car in park, turned the engine off, and placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Standard. Deliberate. The same way she'd been taught at 22, when a staff sergeant told her that black women driving nice cars needed to be more careful than other people, and she'd hated that he was right. The officer took his time getting out of the cruiser. She could see him in her side mirror, young, broad-shouldered, moving with the particular kind of slowness that isn't caution, it's performance. He adjusted his belt. He put his hand on his hip. He walked up to the driver's side window like he was approaching something he'd already decided about. She had the window down before he reached it. "License registration," he said. "No greeting, no reason. No ma'am, no. Do you know why? I pulled you over." Just the demand, flat and immediate, like she'd already done something wrong, and they were skipping past the part where he explained what. "Of course," she said. She kept her voice even. She was good at even. 21 years in the United States Army will do that to you. "I'm going to reach into the glove compartment for my registration. My license is in my purse behind me." "Slowly," he said. She didn't respond to that. She moved slowly. She always moved slowly in these situations. She retrieved the registration first, then reached carefully behind her for her purse, removed her wallet, and handed him both documents without a word. He looked at her license for a long time, longer than necessary. His eyes moved from the card to her face and back again, the way people look at something when they're deciding whether it's real. "Odessa Pruitt Wainwright," he said, like the name itself was suspicious. "Yes, sir." "This your car?" "Yes, sir." "How long you had it?" She paused, just for a moment. "About 8 months." He nodded slowly, like that answered something. "You know why I stopped you?" "I don't, actually. I was doing 61. You changed lanes back there without a signal." She had signaled. She knew she had signaled because she always signals. She has signaled every lane change for 21 years because she is precise and careful, and she learned a long time ago to be beyond reproach in every small thing. But she didn't say any of that. Not yet. "I can check the dashcam footage if that would help clarify," she said. Something shifted in his face. "Not much, just enough. Step out of the vehicle, please." She looked at him. "Am I being detained?" "I'm asking you to step out of the vehicle." "I understand that. I'm asking whether I'm being detained or whether I'm free to go." The officer, his nameplate read Blevins, leaned down slightly, one hand on the roof of her car, the other still resting on his belt. He had the kind of face that was probably pleasant in a different context, but right now it was doing something else entirely. It was doing authority. It was doing, "I am not accustomed to being questioned. Ma'am, this is a very expensive vehicle. I'm going to need to verify ownership. You have my license and registration in your hand. I'm going to need you to step out." She stepped out. She did it without argument, because she knew how this worked, because she had a dashcam running, and she knew how this worked, because getting out was not losing, and she had learned that lesson at Fort Bragg from a woman who'd been through worse. She stood on the shoulder of Highway 41, in her khaki slacks and her dark green blouse, the afternoon sun warm on her face, and she looked at Officer Blevins with her hands visible at her sides. A second cruiser pulled up. She hadn't seen it coming. The door opened and another officer climbed out. Older than Blevins, heavier, with a grey mustache and the kind of eyes that have given up trying to look friendly. Nate said, Dupree. The two of them consulted in low voices a few feet away while Odessa stood by the open door of her car. She could feel the heat radiating off the asphalt. A truck passed on the highway and the wake of it moved through her hair. Dupree walked over. Ma'am, we've got a report from this morning. Black Mercedes GLS, similar plates, was flagged in a theft report out of Nashville. She looked at him. This car is registered to me. You can see that from the documents your colleague is holding. We're going to need to run the VIN. Run it. In the meantime, I'm going to ask you to wait. I'm aware of how this works, Officer Dupree. Something about the way she said his name, calm, precise, without deference, made him look at her more carefully. She was used to that look. The recalibration. The who exactly is this woman moment that came when she didn't perform the anxiety they were expecting. Blevins came back from the cruiser. He said something quiet to Dupree. Dupree's expression didn't change. We're going to need you to remain here while we conduct a search of the vehicle, Blevins said. On what grounds? Probable cause. That isn't probable cause. That's a vague reference to a theft report that does not match my plates or my registration. Ma'am, I know my rights. Her voice was still even. It would stay even. It had been even through a deployment to Kuwait, through a sexual harassment investigation, where she was the one being questioned, through 17 performance reviews and 4 promotions, and the kind of institutional resistance that wears you down like water on stone. This would stay even too. If you intend to search this vehicle, I want your supervisor present and I want the legal basis documented. Blevins took a step closer. Not aggressive. Just close. The kind of close that's meant to make you aware of the size difference, the uniform difference, the power difference. Are you refusing to cooperate with a lawful search? I'm asking for documentation of probable cause and the presence of a supervisor. That isn't refusal. That's a constitutionally protected request. A car slowed on the highway. A white sedan, a middle-aged couple inside, the passenger's face turned to watch. Then it sped up and disappeared. Nobody stopped. Nobody said anything. There were just the 2 officers and the shoulder of the road, and Odessa Pruitt Wainwright standing with her hands at her sides and her back straight and her voice steady as a level line. Dupree was on his radio. She couldn't hear what he was saying. Blevins was looking at her with an expression she recognized. She'd seen it on men who'd underestimated her. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the specific discomfort of someone who came into a situation with a script and found that the other person wasn't reading from it. I'm going to have to ask you to put your hands on the roof of the vehicle, Blevins said. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. You're placing me under arrest. Precautionary detainment pending verification. Those are not the same thing and you know it. But she placed her hands on the roof because she was not going to give him a reason, because she had a dashcam, because she had spent 21 years learning when to fight and when to document, and this was a documentation moment, and she needed to still be standing, uninjured, uncuffed if possible, when the truth caught up. It did not uncuff her. Blevins moved behind her, and she felt the cold of the metal and the click, and she was standing on the side of Highway 41 in handcuffs, next to her own car, on a Tuesday afternoon, and she had done nothing, nothing at all. She didn't cry. She thought about it. The way you think about something and feel it moving behind your eyes and push it back. She thought about her daughter. She thought about what her daughter would say when she heard about this, and then she almost smiled, because her daughter was going to say quite a lot. Her daughter had been saying quite a lot for years. It was one of the things Odessa was most proud of. The VIN came back clean. Of course it did. Blevins read it off his radio and his jaw tightened slightly, and he said nothing to her about it. Dupree walked back over and looked at the ground near his feet. The vehicle checks out, Dupree said. No. We're still going to need to. You've already put me in handcuffs, she said, on the side of the road, in public, based on nothing. Her voice finally had something in it. Not a crack. Just wait. Are you going to uncuff me? Or are we going to wait until your supervisor arrives? They kept her waiting, another 11 minutes. She counted. The sun moved slightly. 2 more cars slowed to look, then passed. A semi-truck blew by and the air moved like a wave. She heard it before she saw it. A second engine and then the crunch of gravel, and she turned her head as much as the handcuffs allowed. The car that pulled up was a government-plated vehicle, dark blue, and the woman who stepped out of it was wearing the uniform of a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. Her cover was squared perfectly. Her shoes were immaculate. She moved across the gravel shoulder with the kind of deliberate precision that takes years to develop and a lifetime to perfect. Lieutenant Colonel Simone Pruett-Ashford was 41 years old. She was also Odessa's daughter. She had gotten the call 12 minutes ago. She had been in her office at Fort Campbell, 11 miles away, reviewing a brief on contractor liability when her phone buzzed and she saw her mother's name and the single text that said Highway 41 mile, marker 34. 2 officers, hands on roof. She had been in the car in 4 minutes. She had been on the radio to the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office in 5. She had her mother's dashcam footage streaming to her phone by minute 7, because Odessa had set that system up specifically for this reason, because they had talked about this reason, because this family had learned not to be surprised. Lieutenant Colonel Pruett-Ashford did not run. Running would have been satisfying, and it would have been wrong. She walked. She walked the way you walk when you want every person present to understand exactly who is arriving and exactly what is about to happen. Blevins saw her first. His face did something complicated. Dupree turned around and looked at her rank, and looked at her face and looked at him in handcuffs against the car and looked back at the rank again. "Which of you is the senior officer on scene?" Pruett-Ashford said. Her voice was exactly as even as her mother's. "It ran in the family," Dupree said. "I am, Ma'am, Officer Dupree. I am Lieutenant Colonel Simone Pruett-Ashford, JAG Corps, Fort Campbell. The woman you have in handcuffs is Sergeant First Class Odessa Pruett-Wainwright, retired, 21 years of service, and she is my mother. I have already been in contact with Sheriff Delacombe's office, and I have footage from the dashcam of this vehicle, covering the last 40 minutes of roadway. I am going to need you to uncuff her in the next 30 seconds, or the next person you speak to will be a federal civil rights attorney, and not me." No one said anything for a moment. A crow called somewhere in the tree line, beyond the guardrail. "The VIN check came back clean," Dupree said. He sounded different now. He sounded smaller. "I know it did. Uncuff her." Blevins moved first. He didn't look at either of them while he did it. He worked the cuffs off quickly and stepped back, and Odessa brought her hands around to her front and rubbed her wrists once slowly and looked at her daughter. Simone looked back at her. Something passed between them that was not for anyone else on that shoulder. Then Simone turned back to the officers. "I want both badge numbers and your supervisor's direct contact. I want a copy of any reports filed in connection with this stop. And I want to be very clear that the footage I have captured this afternoon, including the moment of handcuffing a retired Army veteran with no probable cause and no legal basis." Dupree gave her the information. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. She could see it, the slight tremor when he wrote out his badge number on the notepad she handed him, the way his pen pressed too hard against the paper. Blevins said nothing. He stood slightly behind Dupree in the way of a man who has realized he is in significantly more trouble than he planned. "You're free to go," Dupree said to Odessa. "I know," Odessa said. She got back in her car. Simone stood on the shoulder until both cruisers had pulled away. Then she walked to the driver's side window. "You okay?" she said. "Hands are fine." "Dignity took a hit temporary," Simone said. "The record's permanent." Odessa looked at her daughter. This woman in uniform who had driven 11 miles in 12 minutes, who had arrived with a plan already in motion, who had not raised her voice once. And she felt something that was not quite pride, because pride felt too small for it. "You didn't have to come," she said. "You texted me." "I know. I'm saying you didn't have to come that fast." Simone almost smiled. "I know you're saying that." She touched the roof of the car once, lightly. "Drive safe. I'll call you tonight." She walked back to her vehicle. She drove back to Fort Campbell, and she spent the rest of that afternoon and most of the following morning on the phone, on the record, building a file that would outlast Officer Blevins's career in law enforcement. What followed did not happen overnight. These things never do. But they happened. The dashcam footage was reviewed by the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office within 72 hours, at the formal request of JAG Counsel. The footage showed Odessa's lane change, complete with signal light, visible and unambiguous, 40 seconds before the traffic stop. It showed both officers at the vehicle. It showed the handcuffing. It showed 11 minutes of a retired veteran standing on a public highway. with her hands restrained behind her back while the Tennessee sun moved overhead. Blevins was placed on administrative leave within the week. An investigation was opened. It was not his first complaint. Across 3 years of service, his record showed 2 prior incidents involving traffic stops of black motorists, one of which had also resulted in a detainment with no subsequent charges, and one of which had been quietly settled by the county. Quietly settled, until now. The second case was reopened as part of the same investigation. The county attorney's office declined to comment publicly, which is the kind of comment that says everything. Dupree received a formal reprimand. He had 22 years on the job. He had, until that Tuesday afternoon, no major disciplinary action on his record. He had also not uncuffed a handcuffed woman when the VIN came back clean, and he had not asked Blevins to justify the grounds for that handcuffing. And sometimes the record you build by staying quiet is just as damning as the one you build by speaking. Odessa Pruitt Wainwright gave a recorded statement. She gave it carefully, precisely, with the same measured voice she had used on the shoulder of Highway 41. She did not embellish. She did not need to. 3 weeks after the stop, the Montgomery County chapter of Veterans Advocacy Organization issued a formal statement citing her case and calling for updated de-escalation and implicit bias protocols in all county law enforcement training. Her name was in the statement with her permission. She had given the permission without hesitating. Her daughter's name was not in the statement. Simone had not asked for credit. She never did. That was something else that ran in the family. The case moved slowly, the way institutional accountability always moves slowly, like water finding its level through stone. But it moved. Blevins did not return to active duty during the investigation. The investigation expanded. Other stops, other records, other people who had been quiet until they saw that someone else had not been. That is what happens sometimes when one person stands on the side of a road, with their back straight, and their voice even, and refuses to be made small. The truth expands around it. There is something people miss when they talk about stories like this. They focus on the arrival, the lieutenant colonel stepping out of the government vehicle, the rank insignia catching the light, the shift in atmosphere that happens when power enters a scene it wasn't expected in, and that moment matters. Of course it does, but here is what also matters. Odessa Pruitt Wainwright stood on that shoulder for 23 minutes before her daughter arrived, alone, in handcuffs, on the side of a highway where cars passed without stopping. She did not beg. She did not perform fear to make them comfortable. She did not pretend not to know her rights to make them feel they were in charge. She stood there and she knew who she was. 21 years of service, 4 commendations, a daughter she raised to wear that uniform. And she did not let a single minute of those 23 take that from her. The help came because she called for it. But she didn't need the help to know she was right. She already knew she was right. That's the part that doesn't make the dashcam footage. That's the part that lives inside a person and either holds or breaks. And in Odessa Pruitt Wainwright, it held. It held because something built it. Service built it. Sacrifice built it. The knowledge that she had given this country more than this country had always given back, and that the debt ran in one direction and that she was still owed. If you watched this and felt something, if you felt the heat of that shoulder and the cold of those handcuffs and the sound of gravel under a government vehicle arriving just in time, then you know why stories like this need to be told. Not because they always end this way, but because when they do, someone should be paying attention. Share this if you believe that dignity doesn't require a rank. Subscribe to Voices of Truth if you believe accountability requires a witness. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Odessa's place? What would you have done if you were the one who got that text?